Pamela Barnum's held a successful 20-year career in the criminal justice system. She's been a police officer and deep undercover in narcotics. When Pamela graduated from law school, she left policing and accepted a position as a federal prosecuting attorney. She spent countless hours in the courtroom, perfecting her proficiency as a trust strategist and body language expert. Pamela also studied corporate negotiation in grad school. Now she shares her expertise with others, whether it's to an executive audience of 50, a conference of thousands, or with views on her TEDx talk of almost 500,000. She helps audiences enhance trust, empathy, and negotiation skills with innovative life techniques. Welcome, Pamela. Good to have you with us.
Thank you, Teresa. I am so grateful to be here with you and everyone that's a part of the NSB family. And I just want to go over, some strategies why I take my background and really bring it forward with the content I want to share to you. So I just want to start out by saying, every interaction that we have with someone is an opportunity to build or destroy trust. And we're going to talk about life skills, or what I call life skills. And they're things that I took from my undercover drug enforcement experience, my federal prosecutor experience, and of course, then apply into the corporate and association world as well. And these skills are all around giving us the presence that we need to persuade perhaps a room full of investors to fund our project, or it's the same presence that we need to convince ourselves that it's okay to speak up in a meeting, or it's okay to appear on Zoom or on stage in front of people. It's even the same presence that we need maybe to leave a bad relationship or career, or enter a drug house full of weapons, bikers, and unknowns, which is what I did for more than a decade. Now, I took a look at the research because I want to take experience, but I also it's really important to me that everything I share with you is backed by independent research. So there was a Princeton study that showed that 1/10 of a second is all it takes to get an impression of a stranger. And that longer exposures often don't significantly alter those impressions. And of course, we all want to show up being seen as kind and trustworthy and empathetic. And the evidence from psychology and neuroscience suggests that we tend to make very quick judgments of others within milliseconds of meeting them. So those first impressions, it turns out, are critical and can either really enhance or be a threat to our perceived trustworthiness. So I want to go through some strategies and techniques that I learned in my former careers that will help us achieve those things. So I want to back up a little bit. When we talk about working undercover, I think one of the things that really helped enhance my understanding of this is that I was the only woman in a unit of over 92 specialized officers. And my odds were actually much worse when it came to the criminal underworld. We talk about Me Too movement, glass ceiling. However, none of that caught up to the criminal world. And I speak with former colleagues, and I just spoke at a conference of 200 narcotics officers in the United States, and not much has changed, if anything. In fact, I was in a room with the 200. There were only 4 women drug enforcement officers in that room, and only 2 were working undercover. So the odds haven't changed much. When I spoke with them, the same is happening. So we take a look at trust. We look at what we need to bring those forward. And so I put together something that I call undercover life skills. And it's when we focus less on the impression that we're making on others, and we spend more time focused on the impression that we make within ourselves, because it's our emotions that show up in our nonverbals. It's how we're feeling, and that's how we can control and how we influence when that shows up. So success really comes from those effective communication strategies. And a lot of this is based in nonverbal communication. Now, throughout the presentation, when I reference nonverbal, I'm going to be referring to everything except the spoken word. So including tonality, cadence of our voice, and then of course our body language, our gestures, our environment, what shows up around us. And we're going to go through all of these in the acronym. And of course, former police officer and lawyer, we love acronyms. I think everything comes down to an acronym. So the lead is really being able to lead with intentional communication and nonverbal cues. And our influence comes from that ability to recognize and manage deception cues. We often don't think about that, but it's really critically important to be able to do that in real time. And I'll share that with you. And then, of course, fascinating in a way that communicates confidence and empathy, and that equates to trustworthiness. And then the E, of course, for empower, and empowering with empathy and being able to engage in perspective taking. That's critically important. That was really the cornerstone of my second TED Talk, was all around perspective taking. And that, of course, is critical to emotional intelligence. So whether virtually or live, I like to play a little something that I call "Oh, sit." Now, when we're virtual, it's a little bit more challenging because I can't really tell if you're standing or sitting, but when we're live, I ask everyone to stand. And then I go through a few different examples. And the reason I do it this way is because the research tells me that when we engage in our kinesthetic, so when we're having our bodies moving, and then we have the auditory signal, so my voice talking to you, and then of course the visual through the photographs you're going to see in the coming slides, you're able to retain up to 70% more content, more information, be able to apply it for months later, as opposed to leaving the conference room and forgetting everything that we just talked about. So here's how it's going to work. If you play along in the chat, that's wonderful. You can write down your answers, whatever it is, and then we'll take a deeper dive into some of these. So this is what it looks like. I've put together 5 questions for you. Normally we do more in live, but let's take a look at this. People who display empathetic body language are viewed as more competent. Do you believe that to be true or false? If you type in your answers in the chat, we can see them. Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much. All right, we're getting some great answers, and it's very true. And I haven't given you any examples of empathetic body language, and of course I'd love interaction on that, but let's take a look. Leaning in, for example, eye contact, acknowledging gestures. And when we demonstrate empathy, the studies show us that innovation increases. People report when they see their leaders as exemplifying empathy in their nonverbals, they're more likely to report being innovative, actually 61%. And engagement increases by 76% when people experience empathy from their leaders. I think that is critically important when we take a look at seeing someone, because oftentimes we recognize that our words aren't necessarily what's most important. It's how we see their actions in alignment with those words. Okay, so great, thanks. Here is the next one. And this one, people are most likely to tell higher stakes lies when they are A, texting, or B, on the phone. What do you believe to be the correct answer? A, texting, or B, on the phone? Okay, so we're getting lots of texting, Okay, the correct answer is on the phone, because the question is higher stakes lies. Now, for those of you that answer texting, don't worry, because the quantity is higher of lies in a text. We often joke about the peach emoji, the eggplant emoji, all the different things that are happening that communicate many different things. So more lies, but they're all lower, for the most part, lower stakes lies, because there's a record of them. We don't not automatically think that someone is listening to us and recording our phone calls to use against us at a later date. So higher stakes lies on the telephone. Okay, let's take a look at this one. All things being equal, women are more willing to lie during a negotiation than men. Do you believe that to be true or false? Okay, it is false. Awesome, Patricia, Victoria, yes. So men are more willing to lie. And here's where it breaks down. Men are more willing to lie. And of course, this is not every single person that is male or female identifies as either. So we're just talking research majority. When we take a look, and I'll explain the rationale behind that, men are oftentimes more willing to lie to help themselves, and women are more willing to lie to protect others. Now, here's the interesting part. When competition is involved, it equals the playing field. Men and women will lie equally if it is a competitive environment or they've done something competitive beforehand, golf tournament, some sort of game, something that was involved competition. And that's because of the increase in our testosterone, and that leads to more likely lies. So very interesting stuff for sure. All right. Which picture appears more open to your ideas? Do you believe it is the woman in A or B? More open to your ideas. Okay, we're getting a couple of B's, some A's. Now, for those of you that selected A, is it because the woman in B has her arms crossed? Oftentimes that's what the answer is that I get. And what if, for example, the woman in B, now I want you to take a close look at her face, at the face in both women, and then maybe think about your answer again. What if in B, she has the air conditioning's up too high, or she's got a sore back, or she's had too much gluten and she doesn't feel well? There could be a million different reasons for that. And it's important to really focus on the person's face. And depending on what screen you're looking at, you might not be able to tell, but we see a bit of contempt in A with the side of her mouth pulled up. And of course, in B, she has a lovely smile, which really oftentimes indicates more openness. All right, the last question for this round. Enduring a hardship makes us more likely to show compassion for someone enduring a similar hardship. Do you believe that to be true or false? All right, I think people, that's, you know what? Here's the thing, I was shocked to learn that that is not the case. And here's why. So the reason there's polar bears in this particular slide is because if any of you have ever done the polar bear jump, New Year's Day, you jump in, icy water, usually to raise money for some charity. Here's what happens. They took a group of people who had previously done a polar bear jump, and they took a group of people who had never done one. And they told them a story about this group of people who had committed to it, and then they backed out at the last minute for a number of different reasons. And the people who had never done a polar bear jump felt empathetic, felt, really related, really could show compassion for the people who didn't want to do it. They're like, I get it. I know why you wouldn't want to do it. I wouldn't want to do it either, which is probably why I haven't. The people who had done it in the past did not show compassion. So they thought, we're going to take this experiment a little bit further. So they put it into the workplace with people who had been fired and people who had been bullied at work. Same groups, people, let's use the bullying example, people who've been bullied at work, people who had never been bullied at work. They told them stories about people who had been bullied. The ones who had been bullied showed less compassion than the ones who hadn't been. So the researchers hypothesized and worked this out in several different experiments and came to the conclusion that when something is in our rear view mirror, when we've already gone through it, when it's in our past, we are often thinking, I was able to live through it. I could do it. It's over with. Let's move on. And the reason I bring this particular one up is because when we're communicating with people, especially now, when we've all gone through some of the most challenging times in our history and the division that we see, it is important to take a look at the experiences of others and maybe, just maybe, take a step back and not compare it to the experiences that we've had and try to show more empathy and more understanding and compassion regardless of what those circumstances are. So when we take a look at the LEAD, the acronym for what we're going to be discussing, when we look at L for lead, for example, I want to talk about intentional communication. So that nonverbal that really shines and shows up communicating what's most important to us and our emotional leakage, so to speak, that's showing up. Now, the majority of communication is nonverbal. You may have heard studies, only 7% of what you say, et cetera. Those studies really were looking at different things and had different context. But what we do know intuitively and through the research is that the majority is nonverbal. Think about, for all of you that are parents, that babies are born not being able to speak. They communicate differently. So you can tell the difference between their movements and noises that say I'm hungry versus I need to be changed versus I just want a hug. We understand that. We know that looking at our colleagues, we can tell by facial expressions, their gestures, that maybe what they're saying isn't always what they mean. Our emotions show up in nonverbals. Words are very easy to control. And first impressions, as I mentioned, are really important to manage and to have some influence over. So when we are looking at how we show up, our body really shapes the mind, and our mind shapes our behaviors. So we can look at everything from how we show up, our formal clothing, for example, for work. Normally when I'm at home, I'm not wearing a suit, but this context, it is important for me to show up doing that. And actually the interesting thing around the research shows that when we are dressed more formally, we think more expansively and abstractly and have more confidence. And there's even some studies that show that people in negotiation situations negotiate higher fees in more formal clothing. Having upright posture as opposed to slouching, can really demonstrate interest versus disinterest, or showing that we are really looking in and looking forward and being open towards others, or being closed off and disinterested. Our eye contact, etc., really demonstrates that. So I love taking a deep dive in all of these different things and walking people through exercises and strategies on how they can use that and show up, because it really does bolster our leadership perception before interviews, meetings, negotiations. All of those things are critically important. Now, when we're looking at what it means to influence, and I talk about decoding deception cues from others, we don't normally think about that as a way to influence, but imagine being able in real time to know that when you're in conversation with someone, when you're having discussions, negotiations, that when something doesn't feel right and your spidey sense, your gut, your intuition is telling you it's just not quite right, to be able to really concretely take a better look at that and have a more confident impression, and to be able to control some of those behavior cues and clusters that accurately detect deception. So there are several, and I would love to walk you through all of them about what deception looks like. So in presentations, I normally use 3 examples: verbal, nonverbal disconnect, hand-to-face activity, or hiding our eyes or our mouth, which you wouldn't think people do, but as a prosecuting attorney, when I would ask people questions and they didn't want to tell me the answer, oftentimes it was like this. So being able to identify those cues so that we can course correct in real time, very important. But we also want to think about what deception sounds like. We're going to be listening for things, because not everything is nonverbal. We still need to listen to those words. And I like to walk people through 3 of the most telling. One is referral statements. As I told my colleague, as I indicated in our corporate filings, etc., invoking religion. I swear to God, Allah is my witness on a stack of Bibles, all of those. And then, of course, higher pitched voice, which is essentially a nonverbal because it's our tonality. But when we're listening and we hear that higher pitch, that is a reliable indicator of a deception or discomfort that we need to be watching for. And then, of course, we look at fascinating others, and fascinating in a way that communicates confidence and trustworthiness. And that really comes down to, again, posture, how we show up, how we engage with others, mirroring. There's a great mirroring technique that I used extensively as an undercover officer. And I can say in a decade of deep undercover work, which means living for months at a time, 10, 12 months at a time, in a different community with a different identity, using mirroring techniques really allowed me to build trust, stay safe, and essentially enhance rapport with everyone that I was dealing with. And then empowering, that is our final stage through this whole life process. And empowering with empathy really speaks to more than just how we're expressing empathy to others, but really overcoming that imposter syndrome and second guessing of ourselves and fixating on being judged. And I'll give you one quick example of that. When I did my very first TEDx talk, I was ready. I had it memorized. I knew all 18 minutes exactly where to stop, where to pause, everything. I had it down and I was ready to go. And when I showed up for the rehearsal the night before, I couldn't even remember the first line. And it comes down to over monitoring ourselves. We get in the way of trusting ourselves. And research shows that when we feel pressured, when we're distracted, thinking about all the possible outcomes of performance that could go wrong, we prime ourselves for failure. So I like to go through strategies of priming ourselves instead to feel powerful as opposed to powerlessness, which is really more about being self-absorbed. And when we look at our personal power and we're able to empower ourselves, it allows us to empower others. You know, we can't control the outcome or others, but we definitely we can control how we present our authentic selves. Now, as we end, I want all of you to think about a time when you felt incredibly personally powerful, your most confident self. Think about an example. And if we had more time, you go through that in your mind, you have been primed. The research tells us that you have been primed. Your psychological state is infused with these feelings of confidence and strength. And it's a buffer against negative emotions. And it will show up in your nonverbals, show up in how you communicate to others. You'll feel less self-conscious about expressing your feelings and belief. You'll be more willing to take risks, better negotiators. And when you apply all of these life skills together, you're able to show up in that powerful, confident, and trustworthy way. And I know that all of your work matters incredibly. And I want to encourage you to start trusting yourself, because what you believe about yourself is what shows up in each of those connections. So Teresa, I know we wanted to leave a little bit of time for any questions or to go back over something, so I'll stop it there.
Thank you so much, Pamela. And I really appreciate it. I admit at the beginning, I thought about, oh my gosh, how am I coming across? And then by the end, when you were like, just trust yourself, I thought, okay, yes, it's fine.
Exactly.
Yes. And even in the quizzes that you gave, I really liked how you helped us see beyond the very first image and what might have come to mind right off the top, and what are the things to look for. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. And I should mention that when I've done this live, I don't know how many, dozens and dozens of times, there's always 10 questions. I customize them for each audience, and no one makes it past question 7, including former FBI agents, experienced narcotics officers, people that you would think would know that, because we have these biases that aren't always just the negative biases that we think about. We have biases where we have a bias to trust. We have a bias of people that we know. So we apply more leniency there. So there are all these different things that sometimes play on our mind when we're not able to read the situation. So I'm glad you enjoyed that.
Thank you. Okay, yes, we do have some questions coming in.
Great.
So our first question is about first impressions. And it says, on the first and very quick impressions, if you've given off the wrong vibe and made a bad impression, how can you repair that?
So empathy is the strongest way to repair that. And mirroring is a fantastic way. So there's a few different strategies. One is verbal, where we're going to talk about labeling and mirroring the person's language, which will feel awkward, but I like to walk people through exercises where we practice in low stakes situations. So for example, you feel that maybe the first impression didn't go very well. Now you're having a conversation with someone and they say, I really think the price is too high. And you could respond with, the price is too high. And you ask that question. Now it seems trite. Trust me, you try this in low stakes situations and keep practicing. The next piece of that, if you can add this in, you will really be off to the races. You will go a long way in reestablishing that relationship and building trust. And it's mirroring. Now, not mirroring like the, Simon Says game we played when we were a kid, you hand on your head and they touch their pen and you touch your pen. I'm talking very subtle. So whether you're standing or sitting, whether it's a group or an individual, you're going to be connecting with the point person, the power person, the one that you want to reestablish that trust and a relationship with. And you will very subtly mirror their body language. So they move their coffee cup, 30 seconds goes by, you move yours into a similar way. And we go through some examples on what that's going to look like. After 3 to 5 minutes, you will start to feel a shift. And when that happens, I want you to then shift your body language. So if your legs are crossed, uncross them, move something, watch to see if the person does the exact same thing. If they do, you have reestablished that rapport. It's a great time to then get into perhaps the more contentious or difficult parts of the conversation, or you just know that you've now gone a long way in establishing that relationship. So here's an interesting little aside though. For people that have had too much work done, you know, all the needles in the face and everything's all blown up and we can't move our eyebrows and do the things that we need to do. You may think it's a joke and it's funny, but here's what the research tells us about people who are unable to move their eyes or have facial expressions change. They have more difficulty establishing rapport because they can't mimic in the same way. And we like people that are like us. We like to see ourselves reflected back. And that is one way to do that, through mirroring and mimicking. We're able to express our emotions differently. So I put that out there because it's just an interesting bit of research that I came across, and I found it fascinating to look at that.
Thanks, Tiffany. Tiffany thinks so too. Yes, we agree. Okay, we have another question. From a management perspective. So I'm usually advised to take charge and be tougher as a manager. However, I'm more compassionate and empathetic and give my team breathing space. My team works great with me. Should I accept the suggestion?
No, don't accept that. Do what you're doing. I think that's fantastic. We're all human beings. And I don't think there's ever been a time in our work life where expressing compassion and empathy toward others has been more critically important. And if you're interested, you know, that research around the accelerated percentages in innovation and showing up and just feeling a part of what's going on and working toward a common goal is much more. So think of this as an example, you know, being tough on people, saying things, giving negative feedback, all of that sort of thing. I don't believe is effective. It wasn't effective when I was working undercover, regardless of the people that I was working with, and it's not effective today in C-suite type situations. So we want to be able to express that we understand and that we're there for our people. That doesn't mean that there's never going to be disciplinary action or challenges that present themselves, but I think that they will be farther and fewer between when we change the mindset from us versus them to we. And I think, you know, that sounds like some sort of t-shirt slogan or something, but it's essentially true. And, you know, the more I talk to law enforcement officials, I think that that is something that's been missing in areas where there've been excessive challenges, is that when we remove that barrier, the physical one, how we show up with our nonverbals, and also how we communicate with others makes an enormous difference. So keep doing what you're doing, because you're doing the exact right thing to build a great team.
Thank you for those recommendations, and with the science and research to back it up. And as we wrap, there was a request to put the life screen back up. Are you able to do that?
Of course, yes.
Oh,
Let
that would
me
be good.
bring that back.
Thank you. And everybody will be able to take their notes as it comes back up on the screen. And for me, I've got like my Cornell notes system. So all my key points on this side and my reminders, acronyms on the left, including life.
Wonderful.
So it will help me remember it. There we go. Thank you. Thanks so much, Pamela, for joining us today and for the engagement by our audience. It's always great when we can have a really interactive presentation and learn some skills to take away with us, both personally and professionally. You've helped us with life lessons in trust and connections and negotiation. So thank you very much, Pamela.
Thank you for having me.
Hope to see many of our attendees on our next session in just a couple of weeks. With everything going on in the economy, we have financial commentator Patty Levitt-Reed joining us. So hope to see you then. And as always, we are here to help you with speakers for your next event. And hopefully Pamela is a great fit for you. Thanks, everyone. We'll leave the chat open for a few last comments. Thanks, Grace, for your note, and have a great day. Thanks all.